Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I am delighted on a Wednesday to be joined on the Bulletin by Brian Degning and Colin Watt. Welcome back to the show, guys. It's the last day of Peter Lawwell's tenure. I'm going to say as the CEO of Celtic, because whether or not he's going to still be at the club is another question entirely, particularly after John Mackay's non-committal answer last week. We might want to talk about that. The big question is, I'll come to you first, Colin. What for you is the legacy of Peter Lawwell on his final day in charge?
I suppose you've got the good, the bad and the ugly.
Is that just about the ACSOM Bulletin on a Wednesday?
No, that's just about me in general. But no, there is the good side of things. You've got the 9 in a row, the quadruple treble. And for everyone that's paying attention, the balance sheet CSC team were fairly happy with performances under Peter Lawwell's tenure. There's the good elements of that. The bad elements, you'd probably look at the kind of not mismanagement as such, but when you look at some of the transfer dealings that we looked as if we were going to get over the line, and then they kind of died off at the last minute. The kind of lack of support that maybe Brendan Rodgers got towards the end, bringing in Neil Lennon and the Shivers and the kind of after the treble, that's probably the bad side of it. And then you've got the ugly side, which is kind of the way that things ended up and the way last season went. So there's a lot that can be said about Peter Lawwell's tenure at Celtic Park, but there was a good bit of good mixed in amongst the bad there.
The big thing for me, Colin, and this has come up in a few of the discussions on A Celtic State of Mind over the last few weeks, is where we were and where we are. And I think you've always got to look at that as well, because there are missed opportunities, like you've suggested there, many missed opportunities in the transfer market. Mm-hmm. I think a huge missed opportunity in respect of Brendan Rodgers and what might have been as well. Now, Brian is not at home, so if he drops in and out, we will continue to try and bring him into the conversation. If not, it's just I don't know if it's the bad and the ugly of the three, Colin. I'm not quite sure, mate. I'm not quite sure. Maybe the commenters will be able to let us know. We're going to be bringing in as many comments as we can. So thanks for tuning in on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. It's a massive season for Celtic. It's a massive season for A Celtic State of Mind. Going into the new season, Colin, there's going to be new ACSOM shows. Get subscribing on YouTube. That's where all our content goes. And the more support we get from you, the more content we can create. We're not asking for anybody to pay for it, but we've got some cracking shows coming up, Colin. So I think that what I'm getting at is, when you're looking at the tenure that he's had, you've got to, and it's difficult at the moment because we've just lost the 10. It's difficult because of the capitulation of last season. To look at the entire period of time that he was here, going on 18 years, that the whole shebang, rather than just what's in the forefront of your mind. I'm going to try and bring Brian back in as well for his comments on this. So, Brian, in a nutshell, Colin says the good, the bad and the ugly. What do you feel is Peter Lawwell's lasting legacy at Celtic?
Well, it always reminds me of The Dark Knight, the film The Dark Knight. I've quoted this before, but you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And I feel like Peter Lawwell, if he'd left a couple of years ago, would have been quite highly regarded, although there was a lot of transfer issues and stuff. Mm-hmm. I think the good work he done would have outweighed the bad. However, he's become a sort of poster boy for what's went wrong with Celtic in the past few years as well. You know, the sort of the protracted transfers, the getting too involved in the football battles, dictating to managers, costing the relationship with Brendan Rodgers. So, yeah, it's a real mixed bag. I think he'll be remembered fondly over time, but I think it will take longer than people realise. I actually think Lennon will be remembered more fondly, quicker than Lobo, actually. I think Peter's been divisive for a long time, but I think if you really look at it's hard to deny the success we've had. And I don't want to sound like a club stooge, as we've been accused of being, but 9 in a row, quadruple treble, it is hard to argue with that. So on paper, he's been very successful. The reality is slightly different, but it's like any tenure, anything. It's never going to be 100% positive or 100% negative.
Now, when you're talking about being a stooge, yesterday I was called a poodle. I'm not quite sure what that is in terms of being a Celtic podcaster, being referred to as a poodle. But I did have a giggle at that one because it's always interesting for people to mix it up a wee bit, Brian, you know. So poodle and a stooge, that's fine. Colin, when you're looking at the very fact, what Brian was saying there, being a divisive figure, when you consider that we've lost 3 big leaders from Celtic now, Peter Lawwell officially now being the third after Neil Lennon and Scott Brown. As Celtic supporters, generally, we have seen their issues and their negatives, but we've obviously supported them through the period. Outside of the world of Celtic, Colin, Peter Lawwell was also quite a divisive figure within Scottish football, wasn't he?
Yeah, and I think that's a reason that you might continue to see his name being branded about for the next couple of seasons. I think it was already sort of hinted at in Dominic Mackay's press conference last week, along with Ange, that Lawwell would continue on the board of the European Club Association. And having that connection of having someone who is close to the club and is close to UEFA, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I think for a lot of people, that might be a sign that he's not quite left the building yet. And there's people that just want the complete fresh start. But I think as long as he's not too involved, we've seen what Dominic Mackay has been doing over the last couple of weeks in this sort of temporary role that he has been in. And I think he's impressed quite a lot of people as well. So as long as that continues to be the case, and if Lawwell is still there in the background dealing with Europe and dealing with UEFA, as long as Mackay's the front face and the man that you see, fans will probably continue to let that happen, and I think they'll be okay with that eventually.
Well, as you say, as long as it's an under-the-radar scenario, I think Dominic Mackay spoke about Peter Lawwell always being on the end of the phone, which he saw as a positive. And I'm pretty sure it is, because all the downsides of the Peter Lawwell involvement was mainly down to the things that many football fans focus on, which is players, managers, and that. Again, I said before, Colin, about the appointment of Neil Lennon in the showers. Brian, I don't think that happened. I actually think that was a throwaway comment that was made, and as we do, we obviously home in on everything that's said about Celtic. I would be amazed if that actually happened in the Hampden showers.
Yeah, I don't believe that for a second either. I think it was one of those cases where he wanted the fans to believe that Lennon was the number one choice, and he was, we backed him strongly enough. We've had all these top contenders, but we're sticking with Lennon. He's our man. I think it was a tactic, and you can't blame him for that either. If you look at him in terms of his relationship with Celtic now, he's still I think, maybe I'm wrong, but he's still quite a substantial shareholder as far as I'm aware. So he's still got a lot of ties to the club. If you consider Celtic's ties with the City Group and his son being head of recruitment and scouting, and also his place in the European boards, Peter Lawwell's going to still be a part of Celtic in some capacity. I don't believe for a second Dom's going to be the type of guy that's going to be overruled. I don't think Peter's going to be secretly running things from afar. I think Dom's strong enough, unless you don't get to where he is at his age without being strong enough. So I'm not concerned with the sort of Lawwell influence still being there, because I think over time will diminish anyway, but it was never going to be a completely clean break. He's got too much invested, literally and figuratively, for me.
When Celtic as a club, Colin, have their narrative, and that's the same as any big organisation, I guess. And you go into last week's press conference prior to the fan media getting the opportunity to speak to Dominic Mackay and Ange Postecoglou. Of course, you had the broadcast media, and that was introduced by Ian Bankier. And it was almost as if they could have put a tape recorder and just pressed play and then removed the tape recorder, and that would have been the end of that. Because it's almost like this narrative that we've won this, we've won this, we've won this. Let's paper over the cracks, forget about all the bad stuff, and just go on about the amount of titles that we've won, the amount of times we've got to the last 16 in the Champions League, the amount of trebles that we've won. But let's forget about all the legacy issues that Dom Mackay is going to be inheriting here. And I don't just mean the football stuff. There's been a lot of Celtic fans for a long time pushing for other issues in terms of Resolution 12, the EBTs and everything else that we've suffered as Celtic fans over the piece. Do you think, Colin, that a lot of Celtic fans will never forget that, and that will be a stain on the time that Peter Lawwell was at Celtic? I mean, there's this feeling that, when we could have upped the ante and then we could have been 20 years down the line and away from Rangers, we've actually been dragged back into a situation where we're now second best in Scotland. Yeah,
I think this season, the season that's just been, because I now class the forthcoming season as this season, but I think that the season that has just been has left quite a stain on Lawwell's legacy for a number of fans. And as you mentioned, things like Resolution 12, people will say things like the 5-way agreement and all that. I think with Lawwell leaving the building, any chance of that ever being resolved also leaves the building. I think that's a legacy thing that Lawwell takes with him. I can't see Mackay stepping in and offering a fresh perspective on things like that. I think Mackay's very much focused on the future at Celtic. He speaks about this idea of modernisation. I think there is a lot of things that really do need to be upgraded around Celtic, and sort of either within the stadium or in the club itself. Even simple things like installing card machines within the stadium. That's something that would upgrade Celtic into the 21st century. And it might sound sort of, well, why is that more important than maybe the Resolution 12? It's not. But for Mackay, it will be, because he's a businessman. He'll be looking to ways to generate revenue within the club and to bring the club forward. I think everything that was still on Lawwell's desk in terms of things like that, I think that stays with him. And Mackay will come in and take it from the point that he steps in forward. Anything that was sort of lying there, unless he sees it to be very important, then it's gone as soon as Lobo takes his box and his wee plaque and everything else, his wee name off the door. As soon as that's all gone, that's probably left in the shadows.
It's one of these ones where, people very quickly become figures of hate. Sometimes it's on the back of a tweet about Mark Hughes, for example. So when Peter Lawwell becomes a figure of hate, I think it's also important to look at the good stuff that happened at Celtic. Of course it is. However, it is all now, I think, Brian, about modernisation. And there was a suggestion last week that Celtic had sold in excess of 46,000 season tickets. Now, I didn't hear that in a press conference. I might have missed it if it was mentioned. We will be playing some more of that as the next couple of days proceed, because there's quite a lot of things to talk about. But 46,000 plus season tickets going into this season. I'm like Colin, I'm calling it this season. It's only 20 days away before our first competitive game. Is an incredible amount of backing. I don't know at the moment what the waiting list figures are. Colin, you might be able to furnish us with a figure. I know at one point it was 17,000. But we are heading into the new season in a strong position in terms of the fan backing, despite all the gnashing of teeth that has gone on throughout the last 12 months or so. Do you think the Celtic fans are really getting on the Dom Mackay modernisation kind of bus?
I think so. I think that there's been so much negativity and so much damage done last year, and it's been so low for so long that I think people just keen to move on. If I'm honest, I think people just want the new season to start, things to get back to some version of normality, getting back to the stadium. Lobo's out, Lennon's out. There's not got that stain on the club that they had. So I think people are keen just to move on, and it's one of the things I've spoken about before. Like, I'm really excited for the season because of that. Because I think, for good or for bad, it's just that it's a clean slate and it's a new start. And I think that's brilliant. And I think that's what we've wanted for so long. So that's why I think there's been the uptake of season tickets, maybe more so than we would have expected. I also think I tweeted the other day, Dominic Mackay's not on the job yet, and he's already had more communication with the Celtic fans than I remember Peter Lawwell ever having. so it's off to a great start as well, and I think people have bought into Postecoglou in a way that maybe we wouldn't have expected. He's came across as sort of straight talking, kind of working class values, saying the right things. So I think there's a lot more positivity about the club than there was even a month ago, and I think that's why the season tickets are picking up. And going back to your point about the legacy issues, I think Don Mackay's got the perfect get out, hasn't he? Because that was the previous regime in a way. So he can sort of, if he doesn't want to deal with it, I think he can tactically sort of try and brush it off or deal with it at a later stage. I think he'll give the sort of politician answer of, let's focus on the now. Let's so I think one of the things for the press conference I was cautious of was some of the avoidance. He was very sort of, let's talk about modernisation, let's talk about Celtic family, let's talk about success. I'm going to do this. Thanks to, it's a lot of evasion as well, as much as I was impressed. So I suspect that's the legacy issues will be treated the same way.
So I think what you're saying, Brian, is that whenever we get an opportunity to go into a press conference, we'll send Natasha. Because
100%.
obviously she's got that instinct of a lawyer to push someone on what they're saying. Colin.
I've got to say, Paul, when you look at the timing of the press conference, I think it really did help the season ticket sale. The fact that the fans got the chance to listen to both and Dom, and then I think after that you saw a lot of people that were giving them the chance, that were saying, well, look, this does look like a fresh start. These people are saying the right things. They're saying what Celtic fans want to hear. And I think a lot of people in the last sort of 48 hours changed their mind and did end up renewing, whereas before they were still on the fence. So you've got to say it's kudos to the club for managing to do that, if that is the figure. Speaking about the sort of waiting list, I seen a figure the other day of roughly around 8,000 is what it's sitting at now. And we know from some people that are within ACSOM that got season tickets in a section that they previously wouldn't have been able to last year. They were offered the chance to relocate their seat this year. So, I think the season tickets, I don't know if they'll sell out, but they've definitely done a fairly good job. People speculating that the club expected to lose somewhere in the region of 10,000 this season. So if they've managed to do better than that, especially with the uncertainty on whether we're going to get into the ground, I think that's a good job.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, some feedback coming in from the comments. Field Gerald McEwen, the disco lights. You've done a wee bit more than that, Jerry, as well. Lanky, 67 coming in. His legacy was at the new Celtic away jersey. You've seen the state of that as well, Colin. We'll need to talk about the new Celtic third kit. Yeah. His legacy was keeping us afloat and alive. Shame last season didn't go to plan, but thank you, Lawwell, for all the stuff you've done at our beloved club. And the Urban Coolsey comes in. Some will argue he achieved a lot for the business model, but could a man on half his salary and his age not have achieved the same? Donny Boy 67. Domestic success but failure in Europe due to poor management of transfers, which led to losing money from Champions League, which could have led to the club being more financially stable. I think if you take the period of time, Brian, on that last point, if you take the period of time that Brendan Rodgers was at the club, and you look at the way that he envisions his club and his progress as a manager, it was all about progress in European football. We had an opportunity because we had someone with a vision. We had a squad that was invincible domestically and won treble after treble. We had an opportunity then, I felt, to try and make further progress in Europe. However, every single season we were sitting like we are just now, unprepared for the qualifiers. And there was a knock on every single campaign. And, again, from an observer's perspective, you were looking at that thinking, well, get your business done in January. Get your business done early. Don't leave it until the last minute. Don't leave it to the point sometimes later on where your signings were sitting on the bench because they hadn't come in on time. We scraped through the qualifiers season after season. Sometimes we didn't. And I think that is going to be part of his legacy. So as much as I'm being as positive as possible, Brian, you can't ignore the fact that we stagnated on a European platform, didn't we?
Of course we did. What I would say, again, just in the interest of balance, is think that has to be the responsibility of the manager and the players as well. Although we were slow in transfers and stuff, that excuse what's for, say, Brendan Rodgers' first season. But if his first season goes undefeated, right, we win the treble, and he still don't do particularly well in Europe the next season, that's not just down to transfers. You've got a good squad there, you've got a good team there. So I think that it has to come down to the managers as well. Like, Lennon's Europa League disaster, that was a good team of players here. That wasn't due to a lack of transfers, a lack of transfer support, in my opinion. I think some of the tankings we took against PSG under Rodgers, that wasn't anything Peter Lawwell didn't do, in my opinion. So there's got to be a balance between. I think a really good coach could have done better in Europe, or a coach more suited to Europe could have done better. I don't think it's just down to the transfers, if I'm honest. Yeah, of course, it's a huge part of it, but I think it's important to remember that it is up to the players on the park as well. You can't legislate for players making stupid decisions in the park. Managers been tactically naive, substitutions have been right, personnel picked. So you can pick or you get transfers in, but ultimately the manager has to train them, play them, and organise them. So there has to be an interesting balance in that. So I don't think it's like anything. It's never always been the board's fault. It's never always been Lawwell's fault. It's never always been the manager's fault. It's as a collective they've won, and as a collective they've failed, and that's something that I think is important to remember.
I think there was sorry, Paul. I was going to say there was almost like a strategy every season, and you could predict it. You just mentioned there earlier about going into these qualifiers, and it was always the case that you went into the qualifiers and you knew that you weren't going in with your first choice centre back pairing, because that just seemed to be the way that Celtic went into
more of that later in the podcast, Colin.
Yeah, but then it was always right. Well, we'll sign X, Y, and Z. It's not quite the level that we want to sign, but then if we get into the group stage, then there'll be this extra money released. We'll give you some extra money, and you can bring in the better quality players. That was the way that they always spoke about it every single season, as if it was reliant upon qualifying for the group stage before you could bring in the quality of player that you knew you needed, instead of just going out there and spending that money to give yourself a better chance of actually getting into the group stage. That was the approach that Celtic had for year upon year. And very rarely did it ever come to fruition that actually worked. And then you mentioned it get to January and you're going, right, let's build, let's get the players in that we want so that we're not getting into the pre-season and the qualifiers with a second-rate defence or without a key striker. And then the January transfer window has arguably been the worst thing that's ever happened to Celtic. The amount of duds that we've brought in January, because every single signing seemed to be either a loan to cover a position that we should have covered back in the summer, or it's been a project player, and the project players have never worked. So that is also part of the legacy, and that's not just the kind of on him as the chief executive, but he did come in and he did start getting involved in these transfers, and he did bring in players sometimes over the manager's head, and that unfortunately puts a tarnish on that.
Yeah, it does. And we are going to talk about players because 20 days to Midtjylland, and, we've not brought anybody in yet. There's always going to be speculation at this time of the season. I'm pretty sure at some point Colin and I will probably get together to do a roundup of all of that. But Zinko comes in if we get Itakua, I like that, Vuskovic, Gold, Hickey, and we keep Eddie and Karamoko, would be great for us, I think, a start. Anyway, let's go through some of these problematic positions that we have, because on a daily basis, whilst I'm on the podcast anyway, and I'm standing in for Kevin Graham this weekend, next on a Wednesday, so you're going to get a treble. We used to be good at them. You're going to get a treble of Paul John Dykes on the ACSOM Bulletins. I will be talking about what is our kind of starting lineup as we stand, not if this one comes in or if that one leaves. And at the moment, it is still, I would suggest, Colin Watt, Ralston, Taylor, Welsh, and I'm going to say Ayer because he's not left the building yet, but question mark over Ayer, and Beaton. Let's start off with the left back situation. So Greg Taylor, as we sit here today, is the first choice left back. I found it interesting that Diego Laxalt has moved on a permanent deal to Dynamo Moscow for just over £3 million. I'll not tell you his wages just yet, Colin. Would you have taken a punt at £3 million before I get into the wages?
No.
No chance. Brian, what was your kind of take on that? Would you have taken Laxalt for £3 million?
No chance. No for me. I don't think he was any better than Taylor, if I'm honest.
Well, let me tell you that he's on 41 grand a week at Dynamo Moscow. So God only knows what his wages were last season. And I know that there's certain deals done between loan clubs and parent clubs, Colin. But even if you think he was on a similar wage at AC Milan, right? And we were paying half of that for Diego Laxalt. And as Brian says, he didn't look much better than Greg Taylor. Has Taylor been given a kind of hard time, do you think, in some quarters amongst the Celtic support?
I think Taylor is one of these players that has found the highest level that he will reach as a footballer, and that's at Celtic. And you see that with certain players, and sometimes they're good to have in amongst the squad. You think of guys, and it's no disrespect to them, but guys like Simon Donnelly, who came through at Celtic, and then Celtic sometimes just as far as you get, and then everything from there is a step down. Is he the kind of player that you want in the squad? I'm talking about Greg Taylor now. Is he the player that you want playing week in, week out? No, you want someone who, if you're going to want to play at a European level, if you're going to want to be trying to qualify for the Champions League or get in beyond the group stages of the Europa League, he's not the guy that you want playing week in, week out. But when it comes to the league, he's a solid performer. He's the solid option, but you want better. You want to always improve in that position, and you're not really going to do that with Greg Taylor at left back. Not saying he's a bad player, it's just you can get better.
Well, I take that point, but I'm going to be looking at obviously Celtic as a whole, and I know, listen, we're going to be talking about last 16 appearances in the Champions League, Colin, and it wasn't in the last 5 years, so I know that the game has moved on, etc., etc. But just as an example, I could, I guess, use the famous Barcelona victory in 2012, but it wasn't the latter stages of European competition. The Celtic team that went out to Kaká's 93rd minute goal against AC Milan read Boric, Telfer, McManus, O'Day, Naylor, Nakamura, Lennon, Snow, McGeady, Jarisic, Venegurov, Hesselink. Yes, I am screwing up my eyes because I'm half blind. But when you read through that 11, Colin, there's a few guys in there that on paper you'd say they're not Champions League standard. There is always room, I guess, for a few players who may not be the stardust, as Boyce calls them, in your team, but they do the job and they're steady enough. I'm going to come to you, Brian, on that one. Have we been a wee bit harsh on Taylor? Not Colin necessarily, but as a Celtic fan base?
Yes and no. Before you'd mentioned Strachan's team in Europe there, I was thinking of actually Paul Hartley. And I remember when Paul Hartley signed there, I thought he was nearly 30 at the time. He'd come for Hearts, and yet I thought he was excellent for us under Strachan. Him and Barry Robson in the middle of the park. Now, that isn't what you would have described as a Celtic class. And that team that went out to AC Milan, that got to the last 16 twice, that was down to Gordon Strachan being an excellent coach, excellent man manager, excellent tactician. So there is room for, as you say, guys who are kind of steady eddies, who maybe aren't the world-class players, and you can get a tune out of them. Taylor's a guy, I think, that would give you 110% every time he plays. I don't think he's ever going to phone it in. I don't think he's going to shirk a tackle. He's almost like a Johnny Hayes type, and I think he's good to have in the team, and he can get a tune out of him now and again. What is the answer if you want to be ambitious and move forward? No. I think he's going to be a solid cover to have for someone, solid competition for someone, but he's not the answer moving forward. It's no disrespect to the boy. And there's a few like that. I mean, this might be a controversial point, but I don't think Ralston's much worse than Taylor. I just don't think Ralston's particularly good, but I don't think he's particularly bad either. I think he could probably come on and do a job against Dundee United, St Mirren, stuff like that. Same as Taylor. I think they'll both try hard. Taylor's maybe a bit better defensively, but I don't think he's a bad player, as Colin said. But as the answer, no. If we want to be ambitious and move forward, we're going to have to try and get players kind of above that standard. I suppose the only question over him would be, can he be coached to be better? Can he? He's only 24, 23. So can he be coached to put in a better cross? Can he be coached to be a bit more dynamic going forward? That's the only question mark. But as he is just now, I think he's a good squad player, but I don't think he's any more than that.
I think what you can see is how a good coach can make a kind of average player look really good on his day when he does everything that the coach wants him to do. And like you mentioned, that last 16 team, and you spoke about Paul Telfer. Paul Telfer was limited, but he knew where his limits were, and he never put himself in a position where he was out his limits. Lee Naylor, again, another one that was kind of similar like that. But I look at that Scotland squad that played in the Euros, and someone who took an absolute pasting for some of his performances was Stephen O'Donnell. But everybody was ranting and raving over the performance against England. Now, Stephen O'Donnell's a fairly average player, but the way that he stuck to his role extremely well against England made him a standout. And at times like that, that's when it comes down to the coaching. And I just think over the last couple of seasons, we've not had the coach that can get someone who is that sort of average player to look brilliant on his day if he follows exactly how the game should be played, the tactics that have been set out to nullify the other team.
Colin, I don't disagree with much of what the pair of yous are saying, to be honest with you. And I'm looking at the wider squad, and dare I say it, Bolingoli is still in the building, although there is a fair bit of interest from a couple of Turkish clubs. It looks as though he is going to leave, which is fine. Beyond that, we've got Leo Held, who we've spoken about, Colin, quite a bit. And Doig of Hibs, Doig, he's on the next comment. O2, who played with Clyde, they're not quite there yet, are they? 17 years of age. I don't think we could say one of them is going to be back up. I tend to go with what you're saying in terms of him being a second choice, Brian, and then we've got the likes of Josh Doig, Aaron Hickey in the frame. If you were to pursue one of those, Colin, which one would it be, and would he come to Celtic as the first choice, as Brian suggests?
Do you know, my opinions have actually changed on this, and it comes down to what's happened in the last week. The bid that came in for Josh Doig from Watford, I think, was in the region of £3 to £3.5 million, and Hibs are looking for somewhere above 4. Now, I don't think he's quite worth that yet. I don't think in terms of the kind of player that he is just now, I don't think he's a £4 million player. There was an interesting comment last year. We were on the Hibs press conferences, and it was brought up at the time that Josh Doig's never actually played in front of a crowd.
Wow.
Every one of Josh Doig's performances have actually been behind closed doors or without a crowd. So I think it's going to be an interesting one for him this season to see how he is, maybe if the fans got on his back. But he's one of these players that's absolutely thrived without it.
Yeah.
Now, Aaron Hickey, I wasn't his biggest fan last season when we were linked with him. I know we had the conversations around about this time last year, and he went on to Bologna. I think having had that experience of playing in a foreign league and playing against some fantastic players, albeit I think he only managed to put in, was it just over a dozen appearances because of injury? If he's looking to make a move back to Scotland, if the deal was right, and I think the kind of talk is around 3 million, 3.5 million. On the basis of value, it's probably Aaron Hickey over Doig.
What's your thoughts on that, Brian? Colin makes a decent point there. Fair play to Hibs, I've got to say that first and foremost, because if they've got a player on their hands who's maybe going to be going down to the English game, and we know what happens the minute you go down there. You know, that's as if you're just sprayed in gold leaf and that's it. Then fair play to Hibs, I can see that, but that takes Celtic out of the equation somewhat. I would agree that if it goes beyond £4 million, then Celtic are out in terms of Josh Doig. If it was a flip between the two of them, Doig or Hickey, is that the level? Because we've just said that Taylor, who, let's talk about the progression of a player who is the best player at his club domestically in Scottish football, so he gets the interest of Celtic and Rangers, as many of these players do, and we get Taylor in. Is Doig and Hickey a step up?
No, really, I don't think. I think both of them would still need a lot of coaching, a lot of development. I don't think either of them are the finished article. I think what we need to be looking at is if we're populating the squad with players. I'd mentioned before, you're going to need players who are kind of squad players, which we've got some of. So if you're going to be signing anybody, they have to be players that can come in and hit the ground running right away. The boy Hickey, I don't know much about him. To be honest, all I know is he's been injured a few times over in Italy. He's done okay, but I was looking at returning back to Scotland already after about a season away. Is he going to be the type of guy that's going to set the head of the league? I'm not convinced, if I'm honest. I'd pick him over Doidge probably. I thought Doidge has been exposed a few times in Scotland, particularly in the cup final against St Johnstone. I thought he did look great, if I'm honest. I think there's two ways to look at it. So if you're signing a player who's going to be a squad player, fine, just because we need bodies. But if you've got squad players in that position already, why are we signing someone else that needs coached, that needs developed, and is going to be a prospect? You know, if Taylor's your squad player, your backup, you need somebody that's going to hit the ground running. This young guy we mentioned, the Croatian boy at 19, he has to come in and be the first pick centre back, really. Because why sign somebody else that we need to develop over the next few years? It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me, if I'm honest. So I don't know what. The left backs are a concern for me because I don't think anyone we've been linked with is impressing me, if I'm honest.
On you go, Colin. You're dying to come in there.
I'm desperate to disagree with you, Brian, to be honest. I think when you look at both Hickey and Doig, what they are is more traditional fullbacks. And I think the way that Celtic play suits the sort of fullback. Now, whether Ange changes that, I don't know, but having looked at the sort of style that he's played in Japan, I think that is what he's looking for. He's looking for the fullback to get forward. And I think that's where Greg Taylor's biggest problem is that he can't get forward. You don't see him getting into that final third and putting the ball across. You look at the player that he's kind of replaced in Kieran Tierney. Now, how many times did the ball go out to Kieran Tierney and he was going down that left-hand side and he was creating things for Celtic? You sort of need that from your fullbacks, and I've seen Doig doing that for Hibs, and I saw Hickey doing it for Hearts before he left to go to Bologna. Now, if you've got that, you can coach the rest. You've seen what James Tavernier's been able to do at Rangers. He was fantastic going forward, but he was always defensively very weak, and they've managed to coach that into him. So I think if you can get someone like Doig, like Hickey, who likes to express themselves on the left-hand side and get down there and actually create things, then you can start working on, well, track back, win the tackles. Something we actually did very well with Kieran Tierney as well. He wasn't the best defender at first, but he became that. He was always natural going forward. That's what I want to see from my fullbacks.
Again, I'm going to bring up the point. Sorry, your mic has gone mute there, Brian, unfortunately.
Sorry. I say, Colin, you're right about the type of fullback we need to sign. But would you say Hickey and Doidge are the finished article that's going to come in and really propel us forward? I think they've got good potential, but my point is, when we're doing such a rebuild and we need to hit the ground running, and we've already spoke about how long it's going to take Postecoglou to get things the way he wants, I don't think we should be signing potential when we've already got players in the position. So I agree with you in the type of players there. We need attacking fullbacks, absolutely, and I think Postecoglou plays that way. But for me, to say that Josh Doidge coming in is going to be the answer to your left back problems and it's going to hit the ground running right away and be a fixture in the team, no, for me. I think that he's going to need developed over a period of time. If he was coming in as second choice to a top class left back, then fair enough. But for me, Hickey and Doidge, they're not going to come in and they're going to need help. They're going to need progression. They're going to need time to settle, and we don't have the time to do that, in my opinion, especially when we've got players in that position.
See, when you're looking at the point you made, Colin, in relation to Taylor and his forward play, his offensive play, he did get 7 assists last season, which was pretty impressive.
I think he got 3 in the first game against Hamilton, didn't he? So it was really 4 for the rest of the season.
You've got to take a hat-trick of assists off him.
That was probably our best game last season. If we could have just played every game like that, it'd have been fine.
Oh, listen, mate, we know what happened after that, and I'm not going to labour this point, but Moritz Boyer has just made a permanent move to Russia. He was on loan to FC Ufa, I think they call them, and he's away. So we've missed a trick with that, Colin.
Oh, Diddums.
He wasn't as bad as you made out that he was, by the way, I've got to say. We've already spoken about the centre-half issue. There's been interest in Christopher Ayer from Germany, Russia and England. As Zinko Fix said earlier on, we've been linked with Man City's Itakura and Hajduk Split's Mario Vuskovic. I've got to say, I'm going to sway towards Brian's point in relation to Vuskovic. He's 19 years of age. I read a very interesting piece from someone within his native land in the media there, going on about the fact that his only problem as a defender, he's not very good at defending. That's not the type of player that we're needing at this moment in time. 20 days to go, Brian. Are we going to be going with Welsh and Beaton? That's a big question for me. We joked about it about 3 months ago, but it's becoming a reality.
It's looking like it, yeah. Again, unless you pull some sort of transfer coup that we've not heard about, I think the Croatian boy will be a good signing. I think I'm looking forward to him coming in, but I don't see him coming in being Celtic's first choice centre back for the next X amount of years. I think he's someone to come in, command that position, and but also be able to play Postecoglou's way.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's looking like it's going to be Beaton in Welsh, unless there's nobody else can play centre half. Liam Shaw, he can play centre half, I suppose. So they might drop him back if he fancies him as a ball playing centre back more than Beaton. But either way, it's going to be a very concerning back line, I think, unless you got some real top draw centre halves in, that maybe don't need a lot of coaching, that can come in, hit the ground running, and then maybe a couple of older guys, and then build a team around them and sort of get younger players in and develop them over the course. But to start right away, it's looking a concern for me.
Now, Colin, I keep having a dig at you because you did pick Nir Beaton at centre half in your team of the decade. Are you willing to reassess that decision?
Oh, I mean, I think I've said this a dozen times now. I'll throw Jason Denayer in there. Now, Jason Denayer, he's someone that came up to Celtic very young. I think he was maybe 20, 21 when he joined. So what we've seen out of Jason Denayer shows that even at a young age, certain players can have that maturity level that they can slot right into the centre-half position and look as if they've played there for years. Now, the signing that we're looking at from Man City, I believe he's actually maybe 21, 22. He's actually he's older than you think he is, and he played in the Groningen team. Now, the last player that he signed from Groningen, he went on to have a very, very successful career, so I don't know if you can read too much into that.
Itakura's 24. That's the Man City Japanese international, yeah.
I knew he wasn't that young, so okay, right, it might be a loan signing, but if you get him and Vuskovic in, I still think you'll go and sign maybe AN other. I think. Well, Big
Simunovic is only 26. What's he up to?
I'll tell you an interesting one, right? So obviously Jack Henry didn't even bother coming back to Glasgow, right? The deal got done that he disappeared. I wonder how much of that came down to the fact that the Celtic players are back training and then he disappears. He's in Ibiza at the minute. He loved it. As soon as the travel channel opened, that was him. He was away. He was looking for another couple of weeks of pre-season.
Well, we are short at the back. We know that. I think of all the players that have been linked, Brian, Itakura looks like a better fit because he does have far more experience. And like you say, bringing in some players for some of the positions at a certain level where we're looking for them to develop is fine. But this is a key area of the park that was a massive issue for us last season. And I think if you can bring someone in with that international experience, first team experience, as you say, in Dutch football as well, Colin, it looks as though that would be a good move for Celtic, pulling the old City strings to make it happen. We might see as well, though, Colin, the return of this loan deal, this short-termism that was part of the issue over the last few seasons.
I think when you look at the loan thing of the short-termism, we were in the position where we actually had players there when we were speaking about this. We had players that we'd brought in, and I'm thinking like the sort of the Jeremy Frimpong type. Now, a fantastic player, but we let him go without having someone else in there, and we brought in a loan to cover that. Instead of having, for example, if we do sign Vuskovic and then sign the Japanese boy from City, the Japanese boy might go in as the first choice as Vuskovic learns Scottish football, so that when that loan term's over, you've got someone who's ready to step in. We never ever did that. We've still been trying to replace Mikael Lustig since he left the club. You've not been able to have that right back who's ready to step in.
I wondered when Mikael Lustig klaxon was going to go off, particularly after we've seen him again in action. Yeah, 45 minutes it's taken there, Brian. We'll move into the midfield as well. News that Ncham is still in the building, but AEK Athens are still looking to take him on. I think when we look at the midfield, although for me it's still the strongest area of the park for Celtic when you're looking at the wider squad, we've nothing out right, we've nothing out left. I mean, we've got Forrest and Johnston and not much else. No one seems to be talking about bringing El Yunusi in. But I think El Yunusi did pretty well over 2 loan periods. The point I made to Laura, who got loads of flack for saying that she didn't really rate Paddy Roberts as much as a lot of people, was if you were to line up the 2 loan deals that we did for Paddy Roberts and compare them to the 2 loan deals we did with El Yunusi, I'm pretty sure El Yunusi would have come out better.
He did, statistically at least.
Mm-hmm. So Brian, are you concerned about the midfield scenario? Are you concerned about the fact that we've still got our 3 number 10s and Postecoglou knows Rogic? He has concerns about Rogic's body, which I think he meant just his fitness. Is that a concern for you, Brian?
Yeah, as most the wingers. So yeah, we definitely need wide players brought in. There's no doubt about that. The LUC thing. So I've never been on the Mo train or the Moy train. I've just never quite got him as a player, if I'm honest. I think that he suits a very specific system. So if you're playing that front 3 and you're always playing as a front 3, then yeah, it probably works. But if you need a traditional winger, I don't think it's him. My concern's kind of the lack of physicality in the team all over, especially the midfield. I mean, Cal McGregor's 5'8", Lee Soros, about the height of me, I think it's a 5'5", 5'6". He's just a wee guy. And all you can say, look at Kante, but I think, especially in Scotland, we're going to need a bit of physicality in that midfield, and that's maybe more of a concern for me at the moment. But look, of all the areas of the team you're least concerned about, it's definitely the midfield.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I would echo that without a doubt. And I think that when we're going into the forward position, Colin, interesting enough, Leicester have just tied up Pat Sindaka from RB Salzburg, 23 million quid. He is their odds on Eduard. So when we start the game in 20 days' time, do you think there's a possibility that either Eduard or Aya might start that game? Or, where are we going to be with this? Because it's quite clear that Leicester were interested. Have we scared them off with the transfer fee we were asking for?
I think they have. I think they have managed to do with Norwich and Newcastle so far for Aya.
Is that a good thing? Is that a good thing? I mean, these guys don't want to be at the club.
I think it's probably acceptable at this time in the window. I think if you were doing this as the window goes on and you were still keeping the players that didn't really want to be there, then you'd start asking questions. But there's still 2 months of the transfer window to go, so it's probably acceptable at this point. I did see in the comment section that apparently Celtic posted Twitter pictures showing Edward back in training today. So I guess you'll have that chance to sit down with Ange and discuss things going forward, where he wants to be, what he wants to do for the next 12 months. Look, it's going to be a difficult one to replace him. He's been a big asset to Celtic. And the players that I think we have been linked with so far, including Charlie Wyke from Sunderland, I don't think they're anywhere near that level of being able to come in and replace him. So I think once Ange sits down with all the players, they see what the scenario is, then we'll probably get a clearer picture. But the first game's actually only 7 days away. We play Sheffield Wednesday in 7 days' time. So what will the lineup be then? We may get a better picture of where things are going to go once we see who plays in the next kind of 3 games down in Wales.
Yeah. See, Brian, when you're looking at that, good points made by Colin there. It's difficult to know unless there's any kind of official mention of transfer fees. I mean, so many transfers go through these days for undisclosed amounts as well. And a lot of it's speculation. But if, what has been suggested is true, and we're pricing Ayer out of the game for the likes of Newcastle and Norwich, and they were talking something like 15 million quid, are we then looking for £20 million for Odsonne Edouard? Because the chat was 17, 18 when he was, linked to Leicester. And my point would be, would you not be better taking a couple of £1 million less if the player doesn't want to be at Celtic? We've seen how bad that can be for the morale of the team last season.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. One of the things I think, so I'm of a slightly different opinion to Colin in that I would have sold him pretty much. If you're giving me 10 million for Ayer in the last year of his contract, I'm taking that. Same with Edouard. I feel like if there's players that are wanting to leave and have said they want to leave, I would take the transfer fee now, so that Postecoglou knows who he's working with, knows what he's going to spend, knows what the budget is, knows what the squad's like, and then can move on. What I don't want to happen is you get to the last week of the transfer window, and Ayer and Eddie are still there, and you're planning your season around them, and then you get a bid in, and they go, and then you're back to where we are at square one. I would rather all transfer business was done as soon as possible, whether that's players leaving or players coming in, even if it means you're losing a bit of value on them. Because let's be honest, we lost value on them last year. Eddie, and I love Edouard, so I'm loath to criticise him too much, but last year you saw that. I don't think it was disinterested, I wouldn't say that. I think that's unfair. However, he was certainly scared to put the boot in. He wasn't, and if he's here for another year and wants to leave in a free in the summer, do you think he's going to be challenging 50-50s, trying to win headers, really trying to put himself about the way he would if he's seen his future at Celtic? No. And for the player himself, he's probably right. He's not at risk injury, he's not at risk, a career ender when he's leaving for me. So if it was me, I would, unless he's desperate to stay, which I don't think he will be, him and Ayer would be going to maybe not the first opportunity, but you get 10 million for someone in the last year of their contract. That's decent business. It's not the business we should have done for them, but we can't turn back the clock. We can only deal with the situation as it is. And for me personally, I would rather we were left with the squad of players we knew we were going to have for the next year or so, and work from there, as opposed to waiting for the last few weeks. And are they going to stay? Are we not sure? We have to just plan, make decisions quickly, and sort of move on, and see how this season pans out.
I tell you what, Paul, just part of the whole idea of Peter Lawwell leaving the position and what his legacy is going to be. I remember, if you go back to do you remember the Celtic Festival that was held a couple of years ago in the SACC, and he was actually asked at the time what his policy was on players and the way that they structure contracts at Celtic. And it was always said that the ideal scenario would be that you offer someone a 4-year deal, and within that 4 year, the first 2 years is getting to the stage of, well, actually, how good is this signing and how good is this player going to be? And after 2 years, they were either offered an extension for a further 2 years, giving them 2 years on the deal, or it got to the stage where they developed them to the point where the interest was really high and they moved them on for the top value because they had 2 years left on their deal. Over the last sort of 18 months, and you can say it's down to COVID, or you can say it's down to other circumstances, that seems to have went out the window. You're now at a position where there's a lot of players at Celtic with only 12 months left on their deal, in some cases only 6 months when it comes down to players like Ryan Christie. And it's going to be more difficult for Celtic to get the fee that they want to get, as Brian says, with players with only 12 months on their deal, because it could be that the club just waits till the January and signs them on a pre-contract, and then Celtic lose out on any sort of transfer fee. So I'd like to understand why that changed, why the structure that we had changed to the point where we've let players run down their contract, and then Celtic's hand isn't as strong as what it should be.
I think a big part of that was forcing them to stay for an extra year, because, at this point last year, Colin, they've got 2 or 2.5 years left on their deal. And but we went all out to try, apparently, to win the 10 in a row. What I would say, though, is I'm on the same page as Brian when it comes to if we had to sell Ayer for 10 million and Edouard for 15, as much as I love them, and you know how much I love Ayer, Colin, I would take that and try and get a good sell on with regards to these transfers, because I'd much rather Postecoglou comes in and works with the players that are going to be here all season. I totally agree with that. And on the note of Postecoglou, isn't it about time that I played a wee video of the new gaffer, and we can have a wee chat around that as well. Here's what Postecoglou, or Ange, said last week.
Absolutely. I mean, to be honest, I think for anyone who has the privilege of coming through this football club and being in any role, you miss a great opportunity to really learn and enrich your own life by understanding the origins and the culture of this football club. I'll certainly be doing that. I mean, as you said, I wrote in my book, for me, football's not just a sport. It's well beyond the sport. For me, it's been a kind of vehicle that's steered my life. All my most significant relationships have come out of football one way or another, whether it's friendships, any other relationships I've had. So I understand that this is more than just the club. So I would be encouraging players, staff, anyone who's involved in that football club to get to know and understand the rich history that exists, and because it enriches your own life. So but I'll certainly be encouraging the footballers and to get involved, and I'll certainly, as I said, be getting involved myself. Sometimes it's difficult because there's always the priorities in life in general, and to understand that a player who represents his football club knows the pressures of having to win and be successful. I think it helps them if they also understand what's important to our football club. And it's not just winning. I know everyone wants to win, but I think for this football club, it's more than just winning. And I think once you understand that, it relieves some of that pressure, because you kind of understand what you're representing. So certainly I'll be encouraging as much as I can.
Understanding what you're representing is one thing, Colin. But are you laughing about the winning side of that?
I've watched a couple of these videos now, and I watched just before we came on air the sort of behind the scenes of the first couple of days, and I tell you what, find someone who looks at you the way that Dom Mackay looks at Ange Postecoglou. He sits there and he's always got a smile looking over. He's so chuffed that he's managed to get this guy in the building. Every time you hear him speak about him, it's like, he was my guy and I got him. Find someone who looks at you the way that Dom looks at Ange.
I like that. I mean, that's great. I just thought he was looking at the ACSOM logo to his right, Dominic, and smiling because he's a big fan. However, the reason I brought that up is that there was a few answers that he gave, not necessarily direct answers to the question that was posed to him, but he went down the road of talking about the heritage of Celtic Football Club and what it means, and how it's, as cliched as it has become, more than a club, etc. But when he was talking about it, I did get the sense that he meant it, not just with Celtic, but the way that he goes about his business in football. And when you're using words like representing Celtic, I think that when you're talking to someone, they're trying to sell you their philosophy, Colin, you can get their buy-in. And this is the reason why I'm bringing up some of the players who are on their way out. I'm going to ask you the question finally. I'll come to you first, Brian. Do you think Ange Postecoglou, once he gets the players sat down, and I guess you can bring Griffiths into this equation, Christie, Ayer, Edouard, players that we're expecting to leave, do you think that he can get their buy-in and that they can go on a journey with Ange Postecoglou, even if it's going to extend their time at the club for another 12 months?
I think some of the players will. One of the things we've always complained about is the lack of culture at Celtic recently. Not enough players getting it. And based on some of the things Ange said there, and I don't think it was rehearsed. It doesn't seem like to come across as rehearsed. I think he gets that idea of this is what we need. We need that buy-in, and I think buy-in's important for him personally and for the players at the club now. We always get called the ACSOM cult, but I feel like Ange's the cult of personality because he's got such a presence about him. that you want to buy into, and I think the players will buy into that, and I think it's a good sign that the players will stay under him. You have to assume they're buying into that as well, and especially when you like that to the fact he was talking about bringing youth players through. If he's bringing them through with that idea of this is why you play for Celtic, not just how you play for Celtic, that's incredibly important and something we've missed for years. And some of his other comments I saw, he was talking about his mum and dad working all their day so he could have a better life, and he never takes the position for granted, and he understands that people spend the hard-earned money to go to Celtic Park, and I think that's class. And so I'm motivated by his points. I want to go and play for him. I'd be rotten, but I want to go and play for him. So I can only
Wait a minute, mate. We've only got 7 days to the Sheffield Wednesday game, so I wouldn't write yourself off just yet.
If you saw me play for it, like, you would write me right off.
Colin, Brian makes a good point there, because what we've got is we've got an outgoing manager. I say outgoing, a departed manager who surely with a 20-year association, 21-year association with the club would have got it, would have understood the culture of Celtic Football Club. Yet we've got somebody who's walking into the arena for the first time, Colin, who shouldn't get it because he's got no connection, no previous connection to Celtic Football Club and what this club means to the fan base. Yet he's talking, and I know it's just words, but he's talking along the lines of talking about, you know, representing what this football club means. Now, I've not heard that from Neil Lennon for some time. You know, I've not heard those kind of words. And he was critical of the culture at Celtic Football Club. I guess what I'm asking is, if he's able to instill a culture at Celtic, those guys who want away, do you think that's not going to change, or do you think he can turn them round, Colin? What?
Well, as I said, I think they'll give him the grace of sitting down and speaking to him. And I think look at the way Brian is. Brian's ready to run through walls to go and put on the Celtic jersey just listening to him. Now, Brian admits he's not the best footballer. I'm not the best footballer. Paul, you reckon you can do over 1,000 keep-ups? We might see that in a video coming up soon. But these
just
guys...
1,000?
Well, I said over 1,000. But these guys are playing like week in, week out. They've seen what it's been like to play under the style of manager that we've had beforehand. Now this guy's coming in with his own style, his own take on football. I think they'll give him at least the chance to see if things will change before they make their decision. I think they'll come back for pre-season, and then as it gets towards the end of the window, if it's for them, then they might stay. If it's not, then they know that there's options for them elsewhere.
Listen, I was excited when we introduced John Barnes and Kenny Dalglish as a new dream team. I was excited to hear about a football utopia when Tony Mowbray came in as a manager of Celtic. And we have got to judge Ange Postecoglou and what he does at this football club. So yes, I am looking forward to getting the action back on, even if it's a friendly, Colin. We'll be covering every kick of the ball throughout the season as we did last, except for that game we boycotted because we didn't want to pay money to Aberdeen again, did we? Aye, and we covered the other game. But you had the game and we did discuss it. But yeah, I am looking forward to that, a new approach. The modernisation of Celtic Football Club, just not in the football park but elsewhere as well, and we will be covering it every step of the way. So yes, we are positive at this moment in time. We're not getting carried away with that. We will be covering every single move that Ange and Dominic Mackay makes in the coming season and the years beyond that as well. Thanks everybody for getting involved in the comment section. We are going to be rewarding YouTube subscribers because we have a total of 18 or 19 fantastic prizes, framed, signed, all that kind of stuff, and we're going to be giving them away from the beginning of next month until the end of the year if you subscribe to a Celtic State of Mind on YouTube. The State of Mind channel, I think, where is it, Colin? 12,000. So
12.4.
You know, we got a bigger audience than that, much bigger audience than that. So get subscribing on there, and we will be putting you into prize draws, which we'll be advertising very, very soon as the items come back from the framers as well. So thanks for your support. Colin Watt, thanks for your contribution. And Brian, again, the newest member of the team, and a very good introduction to the ACSOM squad. And I'm looking forward to your debut season as well, Brian, getting involved with the ACSOM cult. Thanks everybody for getting involved, and we'll see you again tomorrow at 12:30.